This is a new security strategy. It's a big moment for the Home Office, which is also at the centre of the debate about immigration policy generally. And as the Windrush scandal showed, this is a very sensitive issue. We have a new Home Secretary. Do we have a new direction? Well, the man himself, Sajid Javid, is with us live in the studio for his first major interview since taking over at the Home Office. And another headache for the government is the future of abortion in Northern Ireland. The Labour MP Stella Creasy is pushing for a change in the Commons this week, with the backing of many Tory MPs as well. And I'm joined by one of the most powerful figures in British theatre, and some say the single most successful entertainer in the world at large, Andrew Lloyd Webber. The actor Michelle Keegan, star of the army drama Our Girls, been telling me about her own family's role in the fight for women's votes. Reviewing the news, two voices from rival Red Tops, Kevin Maguire of the Daily Mirror and Jane Moore of The Sun. Bish bosh. But first, over to Roger Johnson with the headlines.
Good morning. A special service will be held at Southwark Cathedral this afternoon to remember those killed and injured in the terrorist attack on London Bridge and Borough Market a year ago today. 8 people died and 48 others were injured, as Simon Clemison reports.
Borough Market, 10 o'clock. How Saturday night should be.
The more you think about it, the more you let it impact your life, the more they've won. So just carry on, let's get rid of these barriers. Let's just carry on with our day-to-day lives.
I feel pretty safe now because the government police is taking care of it.
This city knows how to live past difficulty. It's done that many, many times through way more difficult experiences. So really, I think people look on.
Police were prepared for a new style of attack, where individuals or groups go on the rampage, sometimes turning cars and vans into weapons. But this was not the first of its kind in 2017, and it wasn't the last. After people were knocked down on London Bridge, the attackers ran towards the market, stabbing those they passed before being shot dead by armed officers. With the Manchester Arena bomb, there were 5 attacks in the UK last year, but there are those who are keen that each one is not forgotten. Today's service at Southwark Cathedral will also honour the work of the emergency services.
We've got a long history of serving the people, the residents of this parish, but this has seen as a new level of strength. And that is very encouraging because it could have destroyed. That's what the intention was. But actually it's built something that's rather beautiful.
Solidarity and defiance are words often used, but here it is about actions too. It's Saturday night and they're enjoying it. Simon Clemison, BBC News.
Finance ministers from the rest of the G7 have strongly criticised Donald Trump's decision to impose new tariffs on steel and aluminium imports to the US. The EU and Canada have threatened to retaliate with new tariffs of their own, but President Trump says that the new duties are vital to protecting American steelworkers and national security. The Department for Education has confirmed that it intends to launch a free website for schools in England to advertise teacher vacancies later this year. The government says that advertising jobs currently cost schools in England up to £75 million a year. School leaders have welcomed the move, but say it needs to be part of a wider strategy to address the challenges facing schools. Firefighters have put out a fire at a 6-storey block of flats in central London. 10 fire engines and 72 firefighters were called to the blaze in Harley Street just before 6 o'clock yesterday evening. The building includes flats, a dental clinic and an eye clinic. That's it from me. The next news here on BBC One is at 1 o'clock. Now back to you, Andrew.
Many thanks, Roger, and to the papers, as ever, which are throbbing with life and brimming with stories this Sunday morning. There's the Sunday Telegraph, a happy Queen at the Derby with a nice hat on. Priti Patel having a real go at the Conservative Party over so much of its policies at the moment. Of course, she lost her job. Equally enthusiastic about the Prime Minister is Crispin Odey, who is a donor who put money into the Tory party and now wants Michael Gove to become Prime Minister, he says. There's the front of the Sunday Mail on Sunday. A great, great story. This, back from the dead, we find Thorpe's hitman. Now, this is the story you may have seen as a BBC drama, the Jeremy Thorpe scandal. And the guy who actually pulled the trigger, who everyone, including the police, thought was long dead, turns out to be alive and well and talking to the press. Next week, I fully expect that Rinka, the Great Dane, will turn out to have survived the attack. And if Rinka is alive and well and leading a blameless old age in a kennel in Sussex or somewhere, we will have her on the sofa next week, I promise. And finally, there is the Sunday Times. George Michael, a very important story here. They have got not an actual leak, but an account of a document about a no-deal Brexit, which is extremely doomy and gloomy, to say the least. They may just be trying to frighten us, but if so, they are succeeding this morning. We're going to talk about that in a moment. Let's start with, I think, that story, Kevin.
No, absolutely, in the Sunday Times. It's a leak, they say, from the Brexit department, David Davis's department, planning for Brexit. And they say they game-played the potential scenarios if Britain comes out without a deal with the European Union. Mild, severe, and what they dub Armageddon. And the severe, not the Armageddon, the severe, the middle game planning is we'd have food, petrol and medicine shortages. Dover would begin to collapse, a port so much trade goes through on ferries and on the tunnel. And we're at the business end of Brexit now. Decisions have to be made. European Council later this month. Clock's ticking down to next March. And customs union, single market, these big questions aren't resolved. Now, of course, Ian Duncan Smith, big Brexiteer, pops up, says this is Project Fear. To some extent, the reality is just kicking in. Brexit is an idea, you understand it, but when you get the reality, somehow disengaging.
Absolutely. I mean, you would expect them to do reports like that, because they'd be foolish not to, wouldn't they, to sort of plan. But, you know, a lot of what you hear about the potential of Brexit is might, you know, could be, would be, whatever. And remember the millennium bug? How that was, we were all
terrified,
crash and blah, blah, blah.
And let's talk a little bit about the origins of this story. So this is a paper produced for a cabinet committee, which we're told is so explosive, it's locked in a safe and is never brought out to sea.
Until now.
Until now, until it's on the front page of the Sunday Times. But I can't remember the phrase, but it was something like cowardly, liver-livered saboteurs. Lily-livered saboteurs, I think was how one source described the people who had leaked this.
Yeah, and thereby standing up the political editor of the Sunday Times, Tim Shipman's story. And you see there is a quote from the department saying, look, we expect to get a deal, we won't be going to this scenario. So therefore, they are looking at it, though, and it's incredible we've got this far, and we still don't know how we're going to be trading with the rest of Europe.
Well, if you're looking for an answer from Damian Green, look no further, or should I say,
Mail on Sunday.
Keep looking. I saw this piece of the Mail on Sunday, and pipe down, Jacob, your noises off are making Britain look weak. And I thought, well, this is going to be a really firm, corrosive piece, but it isn't at all. But he's basically saying he went to see Theresa May this week with Amber Rudd and Justine Greening to assure the Prime Minister that far from being isolated in her search for a pragmatic, workable solution, she does in fact have widespread support from her party. And to back up the headline, which clearly he didn't write, I am afraid that even my friend, the intelligent and energetic Jacob Rees-Mogg, and you know there's a but coming, but it's very wishy-washy. He just says he's overstating our negotiating strength in an obviously misleading way. And he's saying, you know, we did vote for Brexit. We do want Brexit. We should go for Brexit, but we were often rowdy tenants inside the European House. We must ensure that we become good neighbours.
There is clearly a certain amount of blue on blue going on in the papers this morning. What do we make of this Observer story about, is it Crispin Odey? Have I got his name right?
It is. The big donor to the Conservative Party gave £50,000, now wanting May out. He says she can't deliver Brexit. He thinks Michael Gove, who plays such a prominent part in the campaign, wants him in. I hate the sheer arrogance of donors
Yep.
who...
So, right, I'm going to take my money away unless you give me a new Prime Minister.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
He pays the money, wants to call the tune. It's just terrible. It's why we have to take big money out of politics.
Yeah.
No one should be able to give £50,000 to a party and then be setting the terms of who's going to be the leader and who's going to be the Prime Minister.
Publicly call the shots.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it's gone on for years while they're doing it behind the scenes. But when you're actually now, you know, briefing newspapers and saying, "I've paid this money. This is what I want," it's.
Let's
bad.
move on to another political scandal, but a rather elderly one, which is the Thorpe one I was talking about. This is an absolutely extraordinary story.
This is the best story of the day, in my view, in the Mail on Sunday. And
Good old-fashioned journalism.
fantastic journalism.
Using Google.
Back from the dead. And that is, they have found Andrew Newton, who was the hitman, is living in Dorking in a detached house as Han Redwood.
Who allegedly tried to kill Scott, and then his Luger jammed. He killed the dog, and then the Luger jammed, and he couldn't kill Scott.
I mean, I know it has been dramatised, but it is almost like this is like a comedy.
It's almost a spoiler alert for anyone who didn't know and is going to watch tonight, the third installment. But the police had said thought he was dead. The Crown Prosecution Service last year said he was dead. And good luck to the Mail on Sunday.
They found him.
They invest in journalism. There's 8 journalists been on this, but
they
have
used
found
Google.
him.
They used Google. Now, as far as I know, the police have access to Google. Well, they did a little bit of...
Google retired killers in home counties.
As you said, he renamed
Alexa.
himself Hand something or other, and apparently it's an anagram of winner hand or something.
Okay.
I mean, it's laughable, the whole thing.
No, it's very
and I
fun.
love the very English scandal that you were talking
It's
about
brilliant.
earlier, which is brilliant, and the fact that he went to Dunstable.
Yeah,
And then someone said, no, you're supposed to be in Barnstable.
Which is true as well. I mean,
very
it
funny.
is.
But also, let's talk a little bit about Tom Mangold, who is the Panorama reporter, who did a really, really serious, proper documentary about all of this, talked to lots of people who talked about the various different plots, because there's different plots against Norman Scott's life, had it all on tape, it was ready to roll, and then Thorpe was acquitted. And the BBC said, no chance of us putting this out now for legal reasons, and they were all asked to destroy all copies of the documentary, and Tom Mangold didn't. He put it on the VHS, put it under a sofa, and has taken it out, and it's going to be shown tomorrow.
Yeah.
Well done, Tom.
Oh, brilliant. It was fantastic journalism at the time. Fantastic journalism keeping it. We'll now see the fruits of it. But you often get that in organisations, pressure. Your lawyers say you can't run something, but you should never destroy whatever you have.
I was going to ask, so the lesson for journalists is, if something is unpublishable now, it might not be unpublishable in 20 years' time. Keep it.
Never
Absolutely.
destroy anything.
Never destroy
which is
anything.
why my office looks like it does.
Yeah, well, I suspect we're both waiting for certain people to die to tell the truth on them.
The Sun's big campaign today is on knife crime.
Yeah.
And there's been an interview, a very moving interview, actually, with a guy who was...
Yes, Colin James, his name is, and he's an activist now who's basically trying to help rehabilitate gang members. And, you know, a lot of the time you read these stories in tabloids about cushy prisons, etc. And I think a lot of people think, oh, it's been made up by the tabloids, you know, or it's been exaggerated. But no, he says here, one of his main issues about rehabilitation is that he said almost going to prison is like a holiday camp. And this is someone who's been to prison and is dealing with gang members who are coming out of prison. And he says here, he went back recently to the cell that he himself was in. He said there was a shower in the corner, curtains, a phone, PlayStations. The only thing missing is a girlfriend.
Well, it's the phone that worries you, because that gets drugs into the prison.
But I think if prisons were holiday camps, the guards would be stopping people getting in rather than out. Now, I understand sometimes why use TV and games as a way of controlling very difficult people, and taking people off the streets and punishing them is quite right.
But if this guy who works with gang members, who has been there himself, who is an activist, if he says it's almost like a badge of honour to go to prison because it's not really that tough,
they all want to be out.
Then surely we have to listen to him.
What is certainly the case is that there's plenty of streets in London and other cities and towns in the UK which are more dangerous than prison now. If you come from certain communities, if you're a young black guy, your chances of being stabbed by somebody are very,
also,
very
you know,
high.
when I was a
Really
girl,
worrying.
it was always about girls were the ones that had to watch themselves on the streets. It was always, you know, safety about girls. Now my friends who've got sons, they're terrified about their sons going out
There's
alone.
more casual violence against young men than women.
Yeah.
Now, it's the anniversary, as I said, of the London Bridge attacks. A lot in the papers, of course, about that.
Yeah.
And the great job of rebuilding that's gone on around Borough and where that happened.
It is, yeah. And the Sunday Mirror report that 12 plots have been foiled since that attack. We know Sajid Javid, the Home Secretary, you're interviewing him later on. There's almost been a step change in how the government views law and order and police and security now, and putting in more resources. And it was a year ago when 88 people were killed. It was a big moment in the general election, and it backfired.
Was, yeah.
It's got to be said on Theresa May because of the 21,000 police officers who'd lost their jobs on her watch.
Yeah.
I met the two police officers that were badly injured, neither of whom were there. Well, one was off duty drinking with friends. All his friends ran off. He ran in and confronted these three guys. And of course, Wayne Marquez, who was British Transport Police, who came from wherever he was. These guys, you know, police get a lot of stick, but these guys ran in.
Ran towards the
ran in
danger.
as everyone else was running out.
Absolutely. Now, Jane, a slightly more light-hearted take on the law in this country. Geoffrey Robertson, QC.
Yes.
Very well-known social figure, very famous lawyer, and he's now written his tell-all diaries.
He has a deliciously indiscreet diary, as it says here in the Mail on Sunday. Now, we remember this. For anyone who doesn't, years back, the Sunday Mirror, there was a big outcry. Princess Diana was photographed inside a gym owned by a gentleman called Bryce Taylor. Big furore about invasion of her privacy. Geoffrey Robertson was brought in by Bryce Taylor to argue the ongoing case that because Princess Diana willfully invaded her own privacy on several occasions, did that mean that she had a right to privacy? That was the argument. Anyway, as it happened, it never went to court. It was all very quiet and hushed up, and Princess Diana won. Well, says here now, on the evening before the trial of the century, there was a deal, and Diana's lawyers withdrew her claim, reportedly, I should stress,
Keyword.
after depositing $1 million in Bryce's Swiss bank account. This was all swathed in secrecy so the princess could claim to have won. And this issue of privacy versus people invading their own privacy...
Swathed in as much secrecy as the government's no-deal plans. Everything turns up in the papers eventually. Now, I want you to speak up for trees, Kevin, because I know that you're a big tree man.
I love trees. I think that, you know, they green and brighten up any area. And Sheffield Council has deservedly had a lot of stick for chopping down trees. Sunday Times, freedom of information, Newcastle and Edinburgh have chopped down more trees. 110,000 have been lost across the country in 3 years, because it's often cheaper to chop them down than to maintain them. And this is where local authorities, I know they're under severe financial pressure, they've lost so much funding, and they've signed, for instance, in Sheffield, a disastrous PFI deal.
We're almost out of time.
Yeah.
Very, very quickly. Everyone's talking about Simon Cowell and his phone.
Simon Cowell has not used his mobile phone for 10 months. Now, I suspect he has staff that do that for him.
But how many people will say, if I turned off my phone and didn't look at it again, would my life be better, quieter,
Well, he says
pleasanter?
it has worked wonders on his mental health and well-being.
But he'll have a flunky running up.
All of our viewers who have flunkies around them, there's a great tip. Thanks both very much indeed. And so to the weather, it's been hot and wet and horribly humid, a bit like living inside a washing machine or the back roads of Belize. It's enervating, it's exhausting. I have been crawling around like a very elderly tortoise, but apparently it's about to break. Over to Matt Taylor in the weather studio. Matt.
Thank you, Andrew. Good morning. Yes, we've got something fresher on the way, but not necessarily a good deal wetter. This is the scene this morning in parts of northern England. Lovely sunny start. Sunny Sunday for many, but for others it's been a bit soggy so far. Outbreaks of rain central southern Scotland. That will turn a little bit lighter through the day, and a few showers drifting towards Devon and Cornwall at the moment. Won't hit everyone by any means, but away from these areas, good deal of sunshine. Some sunny breaks in the cloud across northern Scotland. Will set off a few heavy and thundery downpours again later. Nowhere near as many as yesterday. A few isolated showers through England and Wales. Most though will sit under sunny skies. Sunny spells for Northern Ireland too. A bit more clouds still southern Scotland and northern England with some patchy rain or drizzle, but in the sunshine, temperatures into the 20s. maybe 26 or 27 in southeast England. Now, the change comes, you can see, from the direction of the cloud moving through the night. So we're getting our winds coming from a north and northeasterly direction to take us into Monday. Still quite a humid and muggy night, though, but lots of low cloud rolling in northern eastern Scotland down through eastern England towards the Midlands for the first day of the working week. And for some of you, it will be a rather grey day. Just 1 or 2 showers here and there. The vast majority, though, will stay dry. Sunniest of all through southern and western counties, western Scotland and Northern Ireland, where there could just be 1 or 2 heavier showers. Get the sunshine, temperatures into the 20s, teens across eastern areas. And through the rest of this week, fresher than last week, Andrew. But whilst it'll be 1 or 2 showers, a lot of dry weather too. Back to you.
Andrew Lloyd Webber is the musical brain behind a huge stream of global hits, from Phantom of the Opera through Cats, Evita and most recently School of Rock. He has been described as the single most successful theatrical impresario. Not now, not here, but around the world and ever. He is being honoured with a Lifetime Tony Award in New York soon, and Andrew is with me now. Congratulations on that award.
Well, thank you. I'm not sure that I really am quite perhaps the impresario of all time, as it were.
That's what they say about you.
I don't think so, really. No, I mean, it's...
Andrew, you've got more gongs than the average kind of Russian tank commander clinking on. What is very special about the Tony Award?
Well, I suppose, really, it's that Broadway is, whether we like it or not, it is the home of the musical. And Broadway is having a really fantastic time at the moment. It's having a real purple patch, and there's some really exciting new writers and new musicals there. And for me to get it from, as a Brit, from that community, it is, I think, probably, it probably is the sort of the one thing I never thought I'd have.
And musicals keep changing all the time. We've got Hamilton at the moment, a hip-hop musical. I wonder what you think about the new generation of musicals in the West End now.
Well, I think it's very exciting. And what's on Broadway at the moment is particularly exciting, I think. I mean, Lin-Manuel Miranda, who wrote Hamilton, I know quite well. And he's, I think, an amazing talent. I was lucky enough to see Hamilton in its very, very early stages, in a very, very raw stage. And I never, ever tweet, never, except this once I did say that I thought that it was the biggest breakthrough I'd seen in musical theatre for years. And then there's Dear Evan Hansen on Broadway at the moment, Pasek and Paul, you know, who are fantastic writers. They also wrote The Greatest Showman, and that has been a huge hit. I mean, so musicals are having a really great time.
Having a really great time. Some people, more sort of serious-minded people, say that in the West End, musicals are crowding out serious theatre.
Well, I don't think that's the case, you know, because, do you know, funny enough, I was looking at an old magazine, which I happen to have lying around the house in the 1960s, and everything is pretty much the same. I mean, the big difference, I think, in those days was, of course, there were a lot more reviews. We don't have reviews anymore in the same way as we did. And they, of course, had a huge musical ingredient, but there's masses of opportunities. Why I wrote School of Rock. I thought there was a wonderful story because it's about how music transforms children's lives. I mean, the fact of the matter is, I mean, if you just take one instant, why it's ludicrous that the cutbacks in schools to the arts and music is just so wrong. Look at the Brit School. Now, the Brit School is a wholly funded state school. It's now had its grant cut for the over-16s. That school produced Adele. It produced Amy Winehouse. What has that earned the country? I mean, for the government to not understand that every penny you spend on music and the arts comes back many, many times over is just nonsense. It's just bad economics.
You were in the House of Lords, of course, for a long time, and then you left because you thought that Brexit was so important that you couldn't give enough time to really thinking about it and speaking about it as you would want to. Since you've left, the House of Lords has voted against the government 15 times. Now, I know you were a kind of slightly easy-ozy Remainer in the end, but I wonder what you think about the peers now.
Well, I'm a I was a Remainer. I do not think that that would have been an issue for me in the House of Lords. I do not think you could possibly be part of an unelected House and vote against the will of the people. If that seems to me to be wrong. It's a difficult one. I myself felt that the House of Lords had become really very political. I joined it 20 years ago, and I was put in then, and it was a very different place. And I'm not a politician. Ultimately, I'm a composer. I've got a huge amount going on in America at the moment, and I just didn't think I'd have the time to be there.
Let me ask you about being a composer then, because I listed a few of your great hits going around the world. They must be like small children to you. You love them all. But is there one in particular, one musical that means more than anything else to you?
Not really. I got to say By Jeeves. By Jeeves is my Cinderella musical. I actually love it. I secretly play it at home. It's the only one.
Oh, really? And are you working on anything at the moment?
I've got a whole load of ideas at the moment. I've got some really quite exciting stories. I want to do something substantial next. I really enjoyed doing School of Rock, but that was slightly me off duty and having fun. I don't know. I haven't quite come down on it yet.
Well, we've got Iolanthe doing very well in the West End recently, and the House of Lords and all of that. Presumably, Brexit the musical is the one for you.
Probably not. Maybe Jeremy Thorpe. Maybe it's Thorpe.
That Thorpe, absolutely.
Thorpe, the musical.
With a singing role for Rinka, I hope.
Well, you never know. Yes, Rinka. That's okay. Yes, I think could be a song there for Rinka. I've done Cats, of course.
Of course you have. Andrew Lloyd Webber, very nice to talk to you. Thanks very much indeed for talking to us. And so to a story that is both moral and constitutional. After the Irish vote to repeat their restrictive abortion laws, the focus has turned to Northern Ireland. Many Westminster MPs, Tory as well as Labour, want to liberalise the law there as well. But should this not really be for the people of Northern Ireland and for Stormont, not for London? Stella Creasy, Labour MP, is in the eye of this storm thanks to a motion she has put down in the House of Commons coming up this week, and she is here now. Stella Creasy, welcome.
Hi, Andrew.
Can I first of all ask you actually what your amendment, if it was passed, would do?
So let me be very clear. In this country and across the whole of the United Kingdom, our laws on abortion are governed by something called the Offences Against the Person Act that was passed in 1861. And it puts abortion in the same category as rape, child stealing and using gunpowder to blow people up. So what that means is that right now in Northern Ireland, where there are no exemptions to this law, if you are raped and you become pregnant as a result of that rape and you seek a termination, you would face a longer prison sentence than the person who attacked you. Now, in Northern Ireland, as in England and Wales, this legislation is key. By repealing this piece of legislation...
So you want to take away the Offences Against the Person Act
in actual fact, and I want to be really clear about this, the proposal we have, and it's a cross-party proposal, is devolution respectful because it's about repealing a piece of UK legislation that stops people in Northern Ireland having medical rather than criminal laws about abortion.
Now, I have read that if your amendment was successful, what that would mean is that decisions about terminations in Northern Ireland would be in the hands of civil servants and NHS staff. Why would that be?
Well, because we don't have an assembly in Northern Ireland right now. Now, that's not within our purview. And I think one of the things I worry about is people are talking about having a referendum in Northern Ireland. I think that does stray into the jobs of the politicians over there. So they don't have an assembly. So it would be up to the civil servants. But they can't do anything on abortion in Northern Ireland unless this piece of UK legislation is repealed.
Stella, aren't you against a referendum in Northern Ireland because you might lose it?
Actually, no. If you look at the evidence about opinion polling in Northern Ireland, even DUP voters recognise that situation I just described about rape. The fact that you can't have an abortion if you are a victim of incest. The fact that if you have a fatal fetal abnormality, you can't have an abortion. They recognise there is time to change. There is a clear majority in Northern Ireland for a medical rather than a criminal approach. But that's up to the people of Northern Ireland.
There is also a majority of people in Northern Ireland, according to the polling, which is all we have to go on at the moment, who are against abortion if the woman simply does not want that child. So that is a different view.
But what we're talking about right now is repealing this piece of UK legislation that stops anybody in Northern Ireland making a decision about that on a basis of medical grounds rather than criminal grounds. So it would absolutely be up to the people of Northern Ireland what happened next, but they can't do anything without that change.
Except, do you understand, there's an awful lot of people in Northern Ireland who say this is our business. It is not the business of London MPs, it's not the business of metropolitan English politicians to change our laws. We change our laws. That is what devolution means.
Well, And I completely agree. I'm talking about changing UK legislation because this would also
in order to change
have an
the law
impact, but it would also have an impact on my constituents in Walthamstow. Indeed, people from Seven Sisters to Southampton to South Belfast to Scotland would be affected by this change. I think it is right that we look at legislation that's 150 years out of date.
But you're really doing it to change the situation in Northern Ireland, aren't you?
Well, it would absolutely, it would force the people in Northern Ireland.
Yeah.
But look, 3 women a day in Northern Ireland either travel to the UK or have to take the pills to secure an abortion. The legislation is completely out of date. It is absolutely right that we give people the opportunity to update that legislation. It'd be up to the people of Northern Ireland how they would do that. But so too, that would have an effect in England. And frankly, I don't think just because the DUP are at Theresa May's table, that should stop us looking at UK abortion law.
A really important question. Do you have the numbers? Because there's a story in the papers today that the SNP, for instance, are against you because they think it tramples over devolutionary settlements.
Well, that's not... I've been talking to members of every political party because
Including
abortion
SNP.
is... Yes, absolutely, because abortion is not a party political issue, and I would be very against anybody trying to turn it into that. We've been talking to them about how this does respect devolution, and I think if people like Ruth Davidson and Hannah Bardell and co look at this legislation and what we're talking about, I think they would support it because it does absolutely put power back in the hands of every nation to set modern abortion laws. What it also does is says that you can't ignore this issue anymore.
Can I turn to one other subject? Because you've put your head above several parapets at the same time. You've signed
the nature of politics at the moment.
I know. You've signed an open
Yes.
letter to Jeremy Corbyn with a lot of other London Labour MPs, like Labour MPs from Wales and the northeast of England, doing the same thing, saying, please change policy and commit yourself to a second referendum or a second people's vote, you call it. Is there any chance of that happening at all, do you think?
Well, we are a political movement that should, and indeed is having this debate. I mean, I don't think anybody can look at Brexit right now and think it's going well. So I think it's absolutely right. Let me be very clear. Nobody's talking about rerunning the referendum. What we are saying is once you have a deal, so once you know what leaving is like, the idea that only 650 people in this country, because they happen to be in Westminster, get to say whether that's what this country wants isn't right to us. So we think the public should have a say. Now they know what leaving actually entails. You know, nobody talked about a £40 billion divorce bill when the referendum was happening. Nobody talked about leaving the single market in the way that we've now seen the government say they want to do. Things have changed. It's absolutely right. And frankly, whether you voted leave or remain, surely you should want to have a say.
I'm not going to channel Jeremy Corbyn. That would be implausible, to say the least. But I think
you'd be Tracy Ullman.
Not nearly as good as that. What I think he would argue is that the trouble with saying that you're committed to another vote, another people's vote, suggests that you don't really accept the result of the first one. And that is lethal for an awful lot of Labour MPs in the north whose voters voted to leave the EU.
And I don't think that's the case. Look, nobody is trying to dispute the fact that we had a referendum. Yes, I campaigned for Remain. Yes, I voted against Article 50 because I thought at the time this is a bad way of doing this. But absolutely, we needed a way of doing this to find out what leaving would look like. We will know what leaving looks like when the government presents a deal. I think it's absolutely right to say, is that what the public wanted? I don't think that's about undermining the last referendum. We know so much has happened in the last 2 years. And actually, if you are confident it's the right deal for Britain, if you are one of these people like Jacob Rees-Mogg or Boris Johnson, you should relish the opportunity to sell that to the public.
Well, I'm not sure that I relish a second referendum, another referendum from reportedly terms, but for the time being, Stella Creasy, thanks very much indeed for talking to us. Now, the military drama Our Girl returns next week to BBC One with a new set of overseas challenges for Corporal Georgie Lane. The former Coronation Street star Michelle Keegan plays the intrepid army medic dealing with humanitarian crises and frontline conflict. And Michelle came into the studio earlier to talk about Our Girl and about her own surprising family history in an entirely different battle.
Shouldn't we be doing more, boss? Right, even if we save half a dozen schoolgirls, at least then on this tour we...
No. Good night, Lane.
I think we are failing in our duty if we don't at least try.
Don't be naive. We're guests in someone else's country.
Now, excuse me for being idealistic.
Michelle, Our Girl, huge success at the moment, 5 million people turning in, many of them people who won't really have thought about the army before. Some people say this is going to be a kind of recruiting drive for particularly working class women coming into the army. Do you see it like that?
Definitely. Like I get comments all the time, especially on social media, of young girls saying that this show has inspired them to enrol to be in the army. And it's actually weird. Yesterday I was shopping and a girl who worked there said that that's her career. She wants to do that as a career.
So you actually trained at Sandhurst?
Before any filming commences, we have to do like a week of training there, where we do like drill weapon training, infantry drill training, patrolling, and I did actually a comprehensive medical training course as well.
So you're in fatigues, getting wet and dirty and climbing under barbed wire and all that kind of firing off guns and stuff.
The whole time.
Did you enjoy it?
I did. I really, really enjoyed it. And obviously the first time I did it, the first season, was quite unnerving for me because I've never done anything like that before. But it's great when you get stuck in and you work together as a team. And we have brilliant military advisors also there on hand constantly that give you an extra nudge.
It's a very, very positive view of the British Army. I mean, in a sense, it's showing the British Army as empathetic, caring, good guys with guns.
Exactly.
And some people say it's a bit propagandistic.
No, I think people think about the armed forces, they think of on the front line, battling, fighting, shooting guns, when in fact that they do a lot of humanitarian missions as well.
And there's a lot about moral choices in this. I mean, is this the right thing to do? Should we rescue these girls? Should we not? And so forth.
Exactly. I think that's why people can relate to the show as well, because people watch the show and think, well, I would do this, I would do that, but sometimes you have to go with your own instincts. And I know sometimes you go on the lines of not being protocol with being in the army, but it's a drama.
I said it was mostly highly realistic, but it has been noted that you're out on the front line and you're looking great. You're heavily made up.
Well, the thing is, that's what I've got a few comments about, you know, I'm wearing makeup, but in fact, I'm actually not. I have tattooed eyebrows, so straight away everyone's like, oh my gosh, she's got tattooed eyebrows, that's not allowed in the army. Well, in fact, they're actually tattooed, and I can't wipe them off. And a lot of the makeup is we're down to a minimum. And I've met girls who do work in the army and who are medics, and they say, well, that's normal. You know, you're not doing anything wrong there, you're still representing the country.
You've obviously become quite close to the army and feel quite positive about it as a result of making these. Do you get a lot of comments about army cutbacks and stuff? I mean, the army is under an awful lot of pressure in lots and lots of ways, the people who are actually out there.
I have seen, obviously, what's going on. And I think that the government should be pumping more money into the British Army, 100%. Like, they not only fight for our country, but they help countries all around the world.
Let me ask about who do you think you are when you came across the birth certificate of, I think, your great-grandmother, and there was a strange name as the registrar. Just tell us what happened after that.
Yes, I went to Manchester Library and went in the archives, and I found my great-grandma's birth certificate. And in the registrar column was the signature of Emmeline Pankhurst, who was obviously the leader of the suffragettes.
So the suffragette leader had been there as the registrar, and that then led to the question whether your great-great-grandmother had actually been a suffragette herself.
Exactly.
Had she?
Well, we went to the Pankhurst Centre in Manchester and we looked at the 1911 census, and Elizabeth, who was my great-great-grandmother, her occupation, it said suffragist in there, so she was a suffragette, yeah.
She fought for votes for women.
Wow.
Which everything you've told me about her is absolutely no surprise. She's been very clever with the census because lots of women would deface it, would scribble all over it. She's actually operating inside the law. She's not breaking any rules by writing suffragist. She's not defaced it or scribbled votes for women across it, which some people did. Yeah. But she's still being defiant.
But she's still proud, like, this is me, this is what I support, and I'm writing that down for everyone to see.
Has that changed your worldview at all? Has that given you a bit more girl power than you might have had otherwise?
Yeah, definitely. Like, I've come from a very strong line of women. My grandma was very strong, my mum was very strong. And it sort of makes sense that, you know, these women are part of me, and it sort of gives me that oomph to sort of go forward and to represent strong women even more so.
Michelle, it's been great talking to you. Thanks very much indeed.
Thank you. Thank you.
And you can watch Michelle in the new series of Our Girl on Tuesday evening at 9 o'clock right here on BBC One. So, it's a year to the day since the London Bridge and Borough Market terror attack, a morning to think afresh about the 8 people who died and those they left behind. The new Home Secretary is Sajid Javid, and he's with me now. Welcome, Mr. Javid. You are, I think, announcing a big new review of counter-terror legislation and so forth tomorrow. Can I ask you, not about the detail, but a few broad headline areas? It appears that up to 2,000 new security service officers are going to be recruited. Is that right?
That's right. That's part of the announcement, making sure we have all the resources we need to fight this severe terrorist threat. You know, the day I became Home Secretary, within an hour, I gave my first interview and I said my number one priority will always be to keep our country safe. And in doing so, clearly the terrorist threat is top of my mind, something I think of every single day, and what more we can do.
So more security officers. What about more frontline police? Because the people who ran towards danger on the day of that attack were police officers. And there's a lot of thought that actual neighbourhood policing is crucial to gathering the intelligence and helping the security services.
Well, that's right. Neighbourhood policing is crucial. So there is more resources, some that we've already announced for counter-terrorism policing. But there's also more work to be done, as you suggest, with neighbourhood policing, because one of the other announcements I'll be making tomorrow is that MI5 will be sharing much more of its information with other organisations. So not just with counter-terrorist police, but neighbourhood police, with local government councils. In some cases, absolutely, to make sure that there's a much higher chance of finding some of those extremists and disrupting plots a lot earlier on.
So some people, I suppose, would say that this is about using local government, using perhaps head teachers in schools and elsewhere, as it were, additional MI5 agents. They're the ones who will be passing information back to the security services, and that in turn may make some communities feel that the heavy hand of the state is too heavily on their backs.
No, I certainly wouldn't be describing them as additional agents. You know, there's a specific job for our intelligence agents, there's a job for counter-terrorism policing. But for example, when it comes to neighbourhood policing, I think one of the lessons learned from the 5 terrible attacks that we saw last year with 36 people murdered was that we had an independent, there was a review done, it was overseen independently by David Anderson, and I thank him for the work that he's done. And some of the work that came out of that was to say that information that the intelligence services have, that they should share it a lot more early on, so that when other organisations get hold of it, they perhaps can do more with it at that very, very early stage.
Can I press you a little bit more on neighbourhood policing and policing generally? Sure. Because you told the Police Federation recently, if you haven't got the resources, then clearly that can have an impact on crime, which seemed to be a hint that the police were finally going to get more resources for the front line. Is that the case?
It was more than a hint. It was a recognition that our police have an incredibly difficult job to do. They're seeing rising demand in, not just, we talked about the terrorist threat, but they're seeing rising demand, for example, from cybercrime. They're seeing a rise in reporting of historic sexual crimes, child sexual exploitation, domestic violence. These are things that we want our police to deal with, and we've got to make sure they're properly resourced. So what I've said to the police is that whilst we have increased resources dramatically in this financial year by some 460 million throughout England and Wales, I want to make it a priority of mine in the next spending review next year.
And have you got the agreement of the Chancellor to spend more on the police and the security services?
Not yet, because we haven't started. Well, on security services, yes, we've already made some of those announcements. On policing more generally, we haven't started the spending review process, but when we do, I'm sure the Chancellor will learn of my views.
When you became Home Secretary, you said that your priority was going to be sorting out the Windrush scandal. And you said a lot about that at the time. Are you now on top of it?
That's my most urgent priority. I'd like to think I'm on top of it. It's not just me, we've got a whole team that is focused on this. We've done a lot in the last few weeks, with the task force that's been set up, the work on the compensation scheme, the special Windrush scheme, so there's a lot of work going on.
Let me ask you a few detailed ones.
Sure.
How many people have been illegally or wrongly deported?
Not sure the final number yet, because there's still some work to be done on that, but we think it's 63. So let me be clear on that. This is people that we've looked at the total number of deportations and or removals since records began, electronic records in 2002, to the Caribbean. That number is about 8,000. We think of those, there's 63 that potentially could have been what are referred to as a Windrush generation. That's people that were here pre-1973. Of that 63, it is worth pointing out, though, that 32 are foreign national offenders, so they were serious offenders that were deported after they finished their prison sentence, and 31 are obviously not offenders and a separate group.
And so they're out there. How many of them are you in touch with now?
Well, of the offenders, of the serious offenders, I'm not in touch with any of them, and I'm not going to get in touch with any of them because I don't want them back in our country. They can stay where they are. Of the other 31, of course, we are going to make every effort that we possibly can to get them, to help them if they want to return or if they want to look at compensation. And in some cases, those deportation removals might have taken place years and years ago, so we don't have their current addresses or the most relevant information. So in every single case, I've contacted the respective governments in the Caribbean. We're working with them, and so far we've managed to reach 7 of the 31.
7 of the 31. So if there is somebody, and we see lots of things on TV about this, if there's somebody who doesn't know Jamaica well but has been sent back to Jamaica, is pretty much penniless, doesn't have a job, doesn't have a British passport, that person will be helped, will be given an emergency passport, will be brought back home again by the British government and compensated.
If they were part of that 31 cohort I've talked about, they will be helped, and we are trying everything we can to get hold of them, and everything. We're working with all the governments, we're working with our embassies and high commissions in the respective countries, and we will be doing everything we can.
So that's deportations. How many people have been wrongly detained?
Don't know yet. We're still working on that. It's a very complex matter because there's obviously the number of people you need to look at is a lot more than removals and deportations.
Yes.
Some of the information, if it's not in electronic form, it's harder to get at.
But you know that people have been wrongly detained, don't you?
Yes. In fact, we already know of some cases.
Lots of examples and cases on the television and so forth.
Yes, absolutely right. But in terms of priority, what I've done is make sure that, number one, we're helping those people that need it right now. And that's what the task force is doing, making sure people have the documentation they want is being made available to them very quickly within days of being, of contacting the task force. Number two are the deportations. And number three, I want to get to the bottom of the detentions.
When this all came out, you said it could have been my family, it could have been my mother. If your mother had been lifted from your family home and put into Yarl's Wood, as happened to many other people, she would want to be compensated, I'm sure. What kind of level of compensation do you think people are justified in?
I don't want to prejudge that, because I think the compensation process should be properly thought through, and the key determinant of what it is, we should be listening to the people that have been affected. So that's why I've started a process of listening to them.
I'm not going to push you for a number particularly, but nonetheless you acknowledge that there are people who have lost their jobs, lost their homes, they may be sleeping rough, their lives have been turned upside down, and they therefore deserve to be seriously and properly compensated by the British government.
I absolutely acknowledge that, and I'd go further. I mean, I think that is one of the worst things that's come out of this. There's a few it's a small number of people, potentially, but it is wrong in every way. It has changed their life, and the big mistakes were made, and I will do everything I can to rectify them where I can, but also to get the right amount of compensation to the people affected most.
This all came about because of the so-called hostile environment, and you said you didn't like the phrase. Did you not like the phrase, or did you not like the policy?
I don't like the word hostile, because I think it's a negative term. I find it quite an un-British term.
Yeah.
Yes, and it's about, I've used the word compliant environment. And what that means is that it is absolutely right that we have an environment in terms of our immigration policy that distinguishes between those people that are here legally and those that are here illegally. And that won't change. Of course, we're going to have that focus. But there are, from the Windrush, I think there will be lessons to learn about how that compliant environment policy is actually implemented. Is it working the way that it was intended? And by the way, it's worth remembering that whole policy began under the previous government and continued under this government.
But it was a very, very aggressive policy towards illegal immigrants. You can't have a bank account, you can't drive, you can't access welfare, you can't access housing. It was very, very tough. Are you going to look again at the actual policy itself?
I'm going to look at how it's being implemented. I want to review aspects of the policy. I've already made some changes. Certainly I've suspended certain things. So, for example, opening bank accounts and whether you can or cannot as a legal immigrant, I'm not sure that the data that we have is accurate enough, so I've suspended that action for the time being. I will be looking at it very carefully, but I do want to absolutely maintain a distinction and say we will absolutely welcome those people that are here legally, that want to do the right thing. There's no question of that. But if you're here illegally, we will clamp down on you and we will not tolerate it.
I get that. But if people are watching and are thinking about a headline, hostile environment policy to be reviewed, that's fair, is it?
I am reviewing aspects of that policy, of course.
All right, let's turn to why the hostile environment policy happened in the first place back in 2014, which was a great public concern about the level of immigration. Since the days of David Cameron, your government has been hooked on the idea of bringing immigration down to the, quotes, tens of thousands. You've never done it, but that's been the policy. Are you yourself committed to an immigration figure of tens of thousands?
Well, first of all, can I just correct you on something there? The compliant environment policy began in the previous Labour government in 2008 when they put restrictions on employers and benefits, access and so forth. There were further acts under the Conservative government. I'm not denying that for a second. But you said began in 2014. It didn't begin in 2014. It began earlier under the Labour government.
There were two key pieces of legislation
there
under the
were
Conservatives.
that built on that policy.
Okay.
But you asked me a separate question, which is about the tens of thousands.
Yeah.
That's a manifesto commitment of ours of having a policy that leads to lower sustainable levels of immigration. Wanting it, we said, I think in our manifesto, we said we want it to be in the tens of thousands.
You, as Home Secretary, are you personally committed to the tens of thousands policy?
I'm committed to our manifesto, but what that means is that over the next few years, I'll be working towards rightly reducing net migration and bringing it to lower sustainable levels.
But you haven't yet said that you're committed to the tens of thousands.
I've said I'm committed to the manifesto, and that commits every Conservative to the commitments that were made.
I don't know what Ruth Davison would say to that. She says, I see neither the sense nor the need to stick to an immigration figure devised nearly a decade ago which has never been met and does not fit the requirements of our country. She's right, isn't she? Or why is she not right?
Well, you get Ruth on your show and you can ask her more about what she said. But
it's fairly clear.
I think where Ruth and I would absolutely agree, and I think every Conservative colleague of mine, is that overall migration today, net migration, is still too high. It's coming down. It's down significantly from where it was a few years ago. And so we need a policy for the longer term that's going to bring it down to that sustainable level. So we want to absolutely have this policy that welcomes people that want to make a contribution, brings those high skills in that we need. But overall, we do need a more sustainable level of net migration.
And tens of thousands is still something that you're happy with?
It's a commitment in our manifesto.
Different question.
No, we're happy with our
answer to a slightly
manifesto.
different question. OK, let me ask you about inside that envelope of tens of thousands, using students as part of the figures. To a lot of people, this seems completely bonkers because, you know, students come in, we earn money from the students, it's part of our economy, and then they go away again and they work elsewhere. Why should they be part of our immigration figures?
Well, first of all, I think it's great that we get so many foreign students wanting to come to our country. It's a great export. It's great for our universities. That said, I do understand this argument, the argument that you've made and others have made. It is worth remembering, though, that as long as the students coming in and then leaving at the end of their studies, in terms of net migration numbers in the long term, it shouldn't make any difference. There is a perception problem around this, and it doesn't
sound very welcoming.
Well, actually, I empathise with that point, and it is something that I've long considered, and it is not my most urgent priority when it comes to immigration right now. We've talked about Windrush and other issues, but it is something I would like to look at again.
It needs to be reopened. There was another group, and Tory MPs have been writing to you, I know about this, which is highly experienced and capable would-be immigrants, particularly doctors.
Yeah, the so-called Tier 2 visas.
Now, we have thousands upon thousands of vacancies for doctors in the NHS up and down the country. Last year, your department refused the visas of 1,500 would-be doctors who wanted to come from overseas and help us in our NHS. One NHS manager described this policy as completely balmy. What's your view?
I think I can understand when the policy was put in place, there was a cap that was established of 20,700 a year of these highly skilled immigrants. And for years and years, that cap wasn't hit. It's only in recent months the cap's being hit. And the doctor that you referred to there is probably referred to the fact that that includes a number of doctors that are qualified, that our NHS needs, that are being turned away.
Yeah, exactly.
So
seems very odd, doesn't it?
I see the problem with that. And it is something that I'm taking a fresh look at. I know a number of my colleagues certainly want me to take a look at this, and that's exactly what I'm doing. And I hope to think about this more carefully and see what can be done.
A lot of these issues are about knowing exactly who is in the country and what they're doing, who's leaving, who's coming in. And some of your predecessors have said in terms that the only way to really get a grip, if you're the Home Office on all of this, is to change direction and introduce ID cards in this country. What is your view of that?
I don't agree with that. Yeah,
Why not?
I just think the kind
Wouldn't
of
that be a simple, you know?
No, I think there are many other ways, and as we develop a new immigration system, which we're going to have to anyway, as we exit from the EU, and something I've already started work on, I think there are many other ways that we can look at, especially with newer technology on immigration and control of immigration and border control. But the idea that every single Brit needs to carry an ID card is not something that I'm convinced by.
All right. You described yourself as a proud British-born Muslim. You're not a practicing Muslim, but you come from a Muslim background. So in that regard, I want to ask you about Baroness Varsi's comments recently. She says there is simmering anti-Muslim there is a simmering anti-Muslim underbelly of Islamophobia within the party. Do you agree with her?
Well, I've got a lot of time for Baroness Varsi, but I'm afraid I do not agree with that. I mean, for a start,
she then went on to say there are certain parts of the party that are in denial about it, but it's true.
For a start, let's just look at who the Home Secretary is in this country. As you just described me, my name is Sajid Javid. I'm the Home Secretary in this country. That said, there are issues with anti-Muslim hatred in the country, as there are issues, for example, with anti-Semitism. All types of hate crime is wrong at every level. We'll fight it and continue to have that strategy that deals with it, and we'll listen to anyone that wants to help us in that fight.
So you don't think there's a need for a new investigation into what's been said by some Conservative people?
I don't, because who said this? It's the Muslim Council of Britain. They've written recently to the chairman of the Conservative Party making these allegations. The Muslim Council of Britain does not represent Muslims in this country. You find me a group of Muslims that thinks that they're represented by the MCB. And secondly, I would be very suspicious of anything that they've got to say, not least because under the last Labour government and a policy continued by us, we don't deal with the MCB, and we don't deal with it because too many of their members have had favourable comments on extremists, and that's not acceptable.
Overnight, we've had 2 more stabbings in London. We've had a huge number of deaths this year from knife crime in London and from shootings, and a lot of people are getting really, really concerned.
Yes.
Are you going to increase the number of frontline policing, not just in London, but in cities up and down the country where violent crime is going up?
Look, I'm very, very concerned about that, as my predecessor was. She put in place, my predecessor, the serious violence strategy. We've got a new government bill, the offensive weapons bill. We've got more money going to community projects for early intervention. Okay. Those are the things, first, I'll be focused on. But as I've said earlier to you, I will also be looking at police and what more we can do to help.
When it comes to guns and knives, Raheem Sterling, the footballer, has famously had a M16 machine gun tattooed on his shin. What did you think of that?
That's up to him. What kind of tattoo he wants to have has got no business of government.
You don't think it's a particularly important issue?
It's not a business for the Home Secretary.
All right, fair point. Let me turn to Brexit. We get to Brexit eventually.
I thought you'd ask me about this.
Yeah, so the front page of the Sunday Times, these various no-deal scenarios, this allegedly explosive document locked in a safe in Westminster, but helpfully described to the Sunday Times, and their source says, in the second, the medium-range scenario for a no-deal Brexit. Not even the worst. The port of Dover will collapse on day 1. The supermarkets in Cornwall and Scotland will run out of food within a couple of days, and hospitals will run out of medicines within 2 weeks. At the end of week 2, we would be running out of petrol as well. Do you recognise that? You're a Home Secretary, you must have seen this document.
I have to say, I don't recognise any bit of that at all. And as Home Secretary, as anyone would expect, I'm deeply involved in no-deal preparations, as much as I am, of course, in getting a deal. And by the way, I'm very confident that we'll get a deal, but it's right that we look at no deal and all these different scenarios. But I don't recognise any of that.
Would there be any problem with supplies flowing in and out of the country if there was no deal?
From the work that I've seen and the analysis that's been done, those outcomes that you sort of refer to there, and they're in the sort of article more generally, I don't think any of them would come to pass.
Because, I mean, if there's no deal, we can keep the border open from our side, but if the French don't, then we are scuppered, aren't we?
Look, as we work towards getting a deal, I mean, that's rightly our focus. But in terms of no deal, it's important for the French and for the Dutch and others that trade continues, even in a no-deal scenario. So they will be making preparations. I have no doubt about that.
You sit on all these important committees. Are we going to see, when it comes to the June summit, new, fresh British proposals when it comes to the customs border and all the other really key issues?
I think we're going to see good progress. You know, as well known, within government, we've been looking at the different trade options, for example. We've been looking at the sort of the so-called sort of fallback options and things, and there've been good, robust debate on that. And I'm absolutely confident as we get to the June Council meeting that the Prime Minister will have a good set of proposals, and our colleagues in York will respond positively.
New proposals we haven't seen yet?
No, I think we'll be focused on what the Prime Minister's already set out in broad terms in her Mansion House speech and before that, and there'll also be a white paper from the government before that, which I think will help the debate.
Home Secretary, thanks very much for talking to us today. Now, look at what's coming up straight after this programme.
Join us at 10 from Uxbridge, where we'll be debating the World Cup. Not so much the football, more the morality of going at all. Then there's the tricky issue of gender. Should people be able to self-declare they are now a woman or a man? And last, the travails of the British High Street. Can it be saved? See you at 10 on BBC One.
That's all we've got time for today. If you want music, turn it on yourselves. Thanks to all my guests. A busy Sunday coming up next week when, among many others, I'm going to be talking to Scotland's First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon. But until then, goodbye.